Some joining us from your meeting. We didn't the plastic policies put together, we can end it. For participants joining via Zoom, please note that we have translation. So please select the one that is please. For those of us joining us here at the venue, please log in via Zoom as well to use your headsets to listen to the translation. So we will be screening a QR code so that you could scan and log into Zoom. We are also recording this briefing and posting live on Facebook. So hello to everyone watching on Facebook. My name is Nairobi. I'm the African Regional Coordinator for GAIA. I'm based in Durban, South Africa, and I will be moderating this event and taking you through this amazing panelists and all of their perspectives here today. So today, our Global South Coalition will put forward the demands for a strong plastics treaty. These demands include addressing the entire life cycle of plastics. Plastics production, reduction, freezing of polymers and chemicals of concern, putting a stop to incineration and similar harmful technologies. Furthermore, we demand the limiting of toxic chemicals in plastics and we call for chemical transparency. We also call for a just transition, mandatory extended producer responsibility based on the zero waste priority. Moreover, we want a commitment to put regulations in place to operationalize policies, as well as pushing for more upstream measures and a robust handle mechanism for implementation and the inclusion of waste pickers, indigenous peoples, and frontline communities, underrepresented African, Asian, and SIP countries, women, and youth. At this time, I would like to again mention that this is a hybrid event, both in person here at Comfort Gardens Hotel in Nairobi, Kenya, and online. And with that, I would like to kick off this event by introducing our first speaker. Our first speaker today is Soledad Maria from the Asociación Nacional de Reguladores de Chile. And a just transition. Great to have you here with us. In some ways, we can guarantee the inclusion, integration, just transition, and accessibility of waste pickers and frontline communities into the global plastic process. And what would you say a just transition looks like for waste pickers?
First, we need to check if the order's working. Now should work. But the audio is working?
This is a very ambitious hybrid event, so thank you all for bearing with us as we prepare.
Hola, probando. Lucha el mundo. Ahora sí que se me ha. Aló, sí. Sí. Hola.
Hello.
Sí.
Okay.
Buenas tardes a todos y a todas.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is one of the most complex points within the treaty. We have tried to link our position to this landscape. And the states and the private world in the past never talked about plastics.
Cuando hablamos de transición, hablamos de
We talk
reconocimiento,
about transition, we
hablamos
talk
de
about
visibilidad,
recognition, about
hablamos de
visibility,
integración y
about
hablamos también de
integration,
oportunidad.
and also about
Cuando hablamos de
opportunity.
transición justa, también hablamos
When we
de
talk about
inversión,
just
mejorar
transition,
las
we
condiciones de los
also include
recicladores, waste pickers a
investments.
nivel global es clave.
Improving the conditions
Cuando
of waste
hablamos de
pickers
transición
worldwide
justa,
is key.
hablamos también de cómo
Just
mejoran las
transition
condiciones
also means
sociales de cada uno
improving
de
the social
nosotros. Y cuando
conditions
hablamos de transición
from our
justa,
part.
hablamos
And just
realmente
transition
de que hoy
also
día los
means
recicladores, los waste pickers por primera vez tienen una
that
oportunidad
waste
tremenda
pickers have
para
for the
ser
first time
incorporados dentro de un
a
tratado
dramatic
donde
opportunity to be
realmente son
included in a
activos.
treaty
La
where they are
transición justa no
recognized.
solamente tiene que ver con la
Just
transición justa
transition
climática,
does not have to
con la
do
transición
only
justa
with
social,
climate just
con la
transition or
transición
social
justa
just
económica,
transition or
con la
economic
transición
just
justa
transition
tecnológica.
or
Tiene
technological
que ver
just
con mucho más que
transition.
eso.
It has to
Tiene que
do with
ver
much
cómo
more than
miramos
that. It
a
has to
personas
do
y
with
mujeres, más de
how
20
we
millones
view
de
these
mundos
men and
que
women,
se han
over 20
dedicado por
million in the
tiempos,
entire
por 4
world,
generaciones a
who
nivel global,
during
al
4
tema del
generations
residuo.
have dedicated
El
their life
plástico
to
hoy día es
waste.
algo, pero nosotros
Plastic
partimos reciclando
is a
chuleo,
problem
ropa,
nowadays, and
vidrio,
we recycle
cartón.
plastics,
Eso ha
glass,
sido nuestra
cardboard.
forma de ser parte de este
That has
proceso
been our
donde
way to be
nunca
part of this process,
fueron una oportunidad y una transición.
where
Hoy existe esa oportunidad.
waste
Y para
pickers never
nosotros
had this
nunca atrás,
opportunity. Today they have
justa
it.
tiene que ser sumamente
And for
clara y
us,
obligatoria.
the just
No
transition
puede
has
ser
to
un
be clear
principio
and
de
mandatory.
voluntades. Tiene que ser obligatorio.
It cannot be
Y
just
generar las condiciones que
an
corresponden
optional
a
agreement.
los
It has to be
recicladores, a los
mandatory.
waste pickers
And it
del
has to
mundo.
fulfill the
Gracias.
conditions needed by waste pickers in the entire world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Thank you so much for your those insights. And we'd like to continue that a little bit further. So maybe we will go to you next to shed some light around waste figures and the just transition in South Africa as well. So maybe specifically around EPR, why should we ensure that EPR standards and guidelines are national, mandatory, and strengthened to integrate waste figures and other waste workers? And from your perspective, what does a just transition look like for waste pickers? So maybe over to you.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. The EPR should recognize waste because and it should be mandatory. It should be from government producers, not only to know that waste pickers are in the countries, but to make sure that it is being provided by waste pickers is being paid for or is being recognized. And EPR should include waste pickers in policy making and co-design of EPR programs, not only for those, but even the implementation of the programs of EPR. They need to know that they become part of everything from the start to the end. It is through policy instruments such as EPR that waste pickers can be integrated. Because if there are no policies of place, there will be no one who takes the EPR of waste pickers seriously. Again, waste pickers should be included in decision-making structures by PROs and government as part of integration. They need to know that for waste pickers to participate, it mustn't be like it's something that they need to be forced to do, but it's the right of waste pickers to take part on it and know what is going to be decided. And they are the ones who need to be integrated on. Like we can make an example, taking part in roundtable discussions, making sure that they are included when the decision around table or being taken. The mandatory EPR should push producers to ensure collection, sorting, and recycling of waste because, like, helping with the infrastructures. If there are no infrastructures or there is no conducive conditions for waste pickers, it won't help. But if producers can make sure that they have waste pickers to make sure that they have that support, it will be good. Like having the running tap water at the landfill and the proper sanitation at the landfill as part of respecting their dignity and human rights. And just transition, shortly I can read our definition as the alliance, as it says, just until the use of plastic pollution in a way that is as fair and inclusive as possible to everyone concerned, creating decent work opportunities and leaving no one. Well, by saying we need to make sure that just transition does not become just an initiative that is not to do anything for people, but we need to see to the lives of us and the workers in the sector being improved. We need to see the empowerment of them having skills, learning how to build up their businesses or maybe to better their future, to make sure that the just transition is working for them and they benefit from the just transition. In South Africa, we have just transition framework which guides how transition to a plastic pollution-free future should look like. Because if, as I said, if there are no bylaws or things that guides the pure on how things to be done, all the instruments that we're coming up with, they will be useless. It will be something that we're just talking about, but it will be never implemented. I just suggestion to make sure that waste speakers organization get support, because we need to see to it that it's not a charity thing, but it's a sustainable support. Because I once had about giving the PP. Three down the line, the PP is one out. And what should we do again? Should we go back again and ask for PPA? But if we got something that is tangible, that will make me grow, knowing that the 3 months down the line, know how to go back and provide for myself. Know that, okay, I can buy now. Let's make a realistic example. If I got a machine from the PROs, I will know that in 3 years time when you come back, I'll tell you that the machine that I will get bought me another 2 machines. I will not go back again to you and ask for another machine, but I will see how to make sure that I'm growing. Another thing on just transition is the recognition and contribution of waste pickers and our waste workers in the circular economy. We know that we've been working informally, but even informally, we know that we contribute on circular economy. And we need to know that people around our society, government, PROs, they do recognize our contribution on circular economy. We need to know that people know that everything that we do is not, it's not in vain, but is to build our economy of our different countries. Lastly, is respecting human rights of waste speakers and other waste workers by setting basic standards for their job and fair for the service they provide. We've been working for so many years as waste speakers collecting informally, and no one has ever paid us anything. I think now it is high time to look at what we're doing. Government, civil society, community at large, even the PROs, they know that we're not responsible for waste. We didn't create waste, but we are there making our livelihood better because of high rate of unemployment in our different areas or countries. But doing that, it means we need recognition somewhere. People need to know that we render a service, that we're doing it for free. But now it is a high time that it's been recognized to make sure that we get something out of the work that we're doing. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Maddie. Thank you so much for those inputs. And we really appreciate all the work that you and Soledad do. Can we please give them one more round of applause? Okay, wonderful. So we're going to move on to our next section, which is a discussion around waste colonialism in the Global South. Our speakers for the section is Larissa Diorbe, Mageswari Sangaralingam, and Dr. Leslie Adegame will be taking us through this. So let's start off with Larissa. Larissa Diorbe is from Acción Ecológica Mexico. And let's start off with the basics and understanding of waste colonialism. So Larissa, maybe you can tell us what is waste colonialism?
Gracias.
Thank you. I would like to start by saying that waste colonialism is the clear evidence of a process of environmental injustice around the life cycle and the death cycle of plastics. And this has to do with the fact that waste colonialism consists of sending thousands of tons and tons of plastics from rich countries where they have a culture, they have a throwaway culture, to the global south countries with lower consumption and economic capabilities. These plastics arrive with the argument that they will be recycled. As a consequence, many territories, in this case in Latin America, that I will discuss, in many of our territories today, plastics have caused a collapse because to the internal production of each country, we must add what we received from Europe. In the case of Mexico, the main exporter of plastic waste is the United States. Mexico ranks first in Latin America in terms of waste received, and Ecuador ranks second. And although internationally there are international instruments which have been designed in an effort to control the transborder trade on waste, in the case of plastic waste, the Basel Convention, for example, has not been enough. We have been able to see this very clearly in our country, Mexico, because, for example, only in 2021, we received 175,586 tons of plastic waste, and this accounted for 35.7% of the annual growth as compared to the previous year. So, although in the same year, the Plastics Amendment came into force in the Basel Convention. So, how do we believe that this plastics treaty can contribute to put an end to this environmental injustice? We firmly believe that it is not a matter of duplicating mandates which have already been established in the Basel Convention. However, what we can do is to rectify and put pressure on the signatory countries of the Basel Convention so that they correct this situation, and we can make a very deep legal analysis to fill all the legal gaps that exist in the Basel Convention, in addition to setting structural limitations. And we need to correct legal gaps, and I would like to mention the two examples, which are the two mechanisms of Basel to control the transborder plastic trade. The first one is a concept called informed consent, the informed consent process. Each country has to agree on receiving a certain amount of plastics. The second mechanism is that there has to be a guarantee that these plastic wastes which arrive into the country will be managed in a rationally sustainable manner. And the gap here is that recycling is considered as a rationally environmental process, even when we know that these plastics contain a great amount of chemicals, additives, toxic chemicals, which are mixed with other waste. They arrive into the country in a dirty condition. They are very difficult to recycle. So what happens in the territories where it arrives? Usually they are burned in cement kilns, and that is an enormous problem because they burn toxic waste under the guise of a climate solution. So there is a climate dimension involved. And we can say that there is no guarantee that these plastic waste arriving into our country will be managed in a safe manner so that they won't affect communities. So we believe that there has to be, although the zero draft addresses this topic, it does it subject to the Basel Convention. So we need to see how this treaty can fill these legal gaps in the Basel Convention in order to put an end to this environmental injustice, which is the trade on waste. I would like to add that in Mexico, we carried out research together with other organizations, which also carried out research in Latin America, all of them members of GAIA. And in the case of Mexico, we are trying to determine where this waste is going now, because when it arrives, there's no record of where they are going to. And this is probably happening also in many other countries. In addition, in customs offices, there is no control on what kind of plastics arrive. So we have a great deal of work to do. We have a lot to reflect on and analyze from the legal point of view. Communities should be taken into account, those communities which are being affected, so that we can get the delegates negotiating this treaty to understand that this can be an opportunity to put an end to this process. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you for sharing those reflections with us, Larissa. Hope all of you on Zoom are still with us. Hi, everyone, again. We are now going to move on to Mageswari Sangaralingam, who is from the Consumers Association of Penang, and Sahabat Alam, Friends of the Earth Malaysia. So, Mages, over to you. What are some of the ways that waste colonialism is evident in the Global South, and any specific examples you can share from your part of the world?
Hello. So the global production and trade of plastic waste, it had grown tremendously over the recent decades. Yeah, all this while, China was the recipient of the world's waste. Yeah, and then they decided this is enough. So China's decided to stop importing waste in 2018. Yeah, the world was in chaos. Yeah, and it shouldn't have been. Yeah, because plastic waste from a rich and developed country, they have the capacity to manage their waste. Yeah, they should not be shifting their responsibility to developing and mostly under-resourced countries. And this is truly an injustice. Yeah, this is what we are calling waste colonialism. So what happens in the recipient countries? Much of the plastic is single use. Yeah, as what we are consuming right now, it's mostly single use and of little or no recycling value. However, it is still destined for recycling operations. Yeah, although not all plastics can be recycled. In most of our countries, it's the HDPEs and LDPEs which are recycled. Yeah, Moreover, what we saw coming into our shores were mixed and contaminated waste. So this actually burdens our water systems, yeah, because you have to wash and then it pollutes our water systems. So the waste that cannot be recycled, these are called residual waste. They are being dumped openly in Malaysia, in Indonesia, and a lot of our global south countries. Yeah, and some of it is intentionally burnt. So when the waste is burnt, as you know, the toxic fumes, it causes respiratory problems and other ailments to the neighboring communities. And some suffered from breathing difficulties, asthma, skin problems, and some of it may eventually lead to chronic illnesses like cancer. In I give you some examples. In Surabaya, Indonesia, communities were using the plastic waste, which came with paper bales, to fuel their stoves to make tofu. Yeah, that's bean curd. And dioxins were also found in eggs from chickens in the neighborhood. Yeah, the cost and burden to public health actually it far outweighs the revenue that is purportedly gained from recycling and waste trade. We also saw illegal recycling plants popping up in Malaysia, mostly by investors from China. They operate without permits. They use low-end technology and environmentally harmful methods of disposal. Yeah, now we see them increasingly starting up paper and plastic recycling plants, and they have waste incinerators in their facilities. Yeah, so again, toxic emissions from the waste incinerators. Another issue is hidden plastics. So you may not be getting plastic waste, but the waste may be coming in as paper waste, which has contaminated with plastics. There's also electrical products with plastics, textile waste, rubber, tire waste. And there is also this waste type, which is called refuse derived fuel. So all this comes in the name of recycling. Yeah, but most of it cannot be recycled. So when countries started pushing back, Malaysia, Vietnam, Indonesia, these said no more to this waste imports, they started going into countries such as Myanmar and Laos. Yeah, an investigation report had just was released last month, and they found this waste that was dumped in Myanmar comes from the West. Yeah, this is totally an environmental injustice. So that's why we've been calling for a total ban on trade in waste. Yeah, but then banning plastic waste exports without reducing plastic production will likely trigger more dumping. Yeah, and will cause toxic pollution and contribute to the climate crisis. So we view that the crisis of plastic pollution should be achieved from upstream, reducing the overall production of plastics, ban unnecessary single-use plastics, recyclable plastics, toxic polymers, and other measures to ensure the plastic crisis is tackled at its root cause. Yeah, don't make it into a waste management issue. Yeah. So lastly, no country should be made a dumping ground. Yeah, we must take responsibility of the waste that we generate. Yeah, we must end waste colonialism. Thank you.
Thank you so much, my guest, for those reflections and insights. We're going to end up the discussion on waste colonialism now, even though I'm sure we can all agree we could go on talking about this for much longer. But next up, I'd like to invite Dr. Leslie Adegame to share with us some of his insights. Dr. Leslie is from the Sustainable Research and Action for Environmental Development, which is SRADEV in Nigeria. So, Dr. Leslie, how can the Global Plastics Treaty support the end to waste colonialism in the global south?
Yeah, thank you so much. So let me just say, this is the reason why we're here, precisely. We need to find solutions to this global serious crisis of plastic pollution. And the global south are not part of the problem, we're not part of the crisis, but definitely we have to be part of the solution. So we're actually having this discourse, which is very important to be able to provide solution. And the plastic treaty, which is ongoing, is just one best avenue within which we can address this global issue. Let me first start with, there are two basic myths. A lot of my colleagues have talked about, the colonialism, basically. But there are myths around this whole issue, which I would like to debunk precisely, because this myth keeps on going. And we have seen that happen right here in this debate. I mean, in the early parts of this debate, which we think we can't continue to promote. For example, that waste colonialism, colonialism and its repercussion probably, to a large extent, has ended. We are still seeing quite a lot of it from the examples and statements we are hearing. So in the aspect of the plastic waste, that the global north colonialism or impact happening on the southern part is more or less like a blessing. No, this is not correct, because we have continued to see continuous dumping of waste. I give, for example, from the African setting. We've had cases of our own case of cocoa dumping waste in Nigeria. We know the case of Cote d'Ivoire. We know the case of Tunisia and so many other countries that have suffered from this continuous dumping, and it's still ongoing. With particular reference to plastic waste and how this trading can help to address this. I want to say that if you see the Global South particularly well strategically positioned, with highest ambition, you'll be able to see how this can be addressed. It's because we are most impacted. And how we think this can be addressed, even though we understand some argument we see from the floor is already going against waste trade, which I see as continuous propagation of the same colonialism which we're talking about, is that the fact we have to use this very ambitious treaty to address it. The best way to go is a full ban on waste trade. And I must be very, very frank and sincere about this. If we don't have a full ban on plastic waste trade, then we have not made any intro into the solution. I say this quickly because even though we argue that the Basel Convention has taken care of quite a lot of the plastic waste, hazardous transboundary, hazardous waste trade, there are quite a lot of loopholes which we see in the Basel Convention, and a number of them were mentioned by my colleague here. The question of the exemptions around Y48 class of plastics, the refuse-derived fuel, the textiles, synthetics, the rubber waste, they are not covered. They are not covered by the Basel Convention. And this is where the Global South suffers from tremendously. So if we can strongly get a very ambitious plastic trading that totally put a full ban, then I think we will be in the right position. Full ban on plastic waste is the way to go if we must end waste colonialism, and it has to end now.
Amazing. Thank you, Dr. Leslie. And thank you to all of our panelists on that session. So thank you, Larissa, Mageswari, and Dr. Leslie. Can we give them one more round of applause, please? Okay, next on our agenda, we're going to be discussing Indigenous rights. And with us today, we have Lina Estrada Anyokazi, who is the UNEP Indigenous Peoples representative, and will be steering this conversation. So Lina, so how are the rights of Indigenous people being impacted by the global plastics crisis? And how would you say that Indigenous science and traditional knowledge has supported and demonstrated alternatives to plastics in the first place? So over to you.
Muchísimas gracias a todos y a todas. Primero quiero
Thank you, everyone.
decirles que
First, I'd like
mi
to tell you
nombre tradicional es
that my
Kusicuri, que
traditional name is
significa
Tunsikuri,
planta de yuca,
which means a yucca
que
plant
crece
that grows
joven y que se arranca un ciclo, ¿no? Justamente lo
that is young
vida
and that is
existe.
taken out before its
También
cycle
soy
finished.
de la Amazonía colombiana, del
I'm from the
corazón de la
Colombian
Amazonía
Amazon, from the
colombiana, y soy
heart
hija
of
del
the Colombian
tabaco, de la
Amazon,
coca
and I'm
y de
a
la
child
yuca
of the coca, the
brava,
yucca,
decimos
and
nosotros.
tobacco.
Es importante decir que para
It
que
is
los pueblos
important to say
indígenas
that indigenous
soportamos
peoples
una carga que es
support or have
desproporcionada
to withstand
de los
an
impactos de la
unproportional
contaminación
load
plástica.
of the impact
Nuestros
coming from
derechos
plastic
también son
contamination or
atropellados
pollution. Our
en cada
rights
etapa
are
del
violated
ciclo de vida del
in
plástico.
every single
Nuestros
stage of the
territorios
plastic
son
life cycle.
colonizados,
Our
nuestros
territories are
líderes son
colonialized,
asesinados
our
y
leaders
nuestras
are
comunidades son
assassinated, and our
desplazadas
communities
en
are
nombre de las
displaced
grandes empresas
on
multinacionales
behalf
para la
of
extracción del
large
petróleo
multinational
y la
companies for
consecuente
oil
producción de
extraction
combustibles
and
y, por
to
supuesto, del
produce
plástico.
fuel and, of course, plastic.
Recordando los impactos que las
Thinking
industrias
about
petroquímicas han
the
tenido en
plastic of
nuestros
petrochemical
territorios
industries
y
on our
los ecosistemas,
territories
quisiera
and the
citar un ejemplo
ecosystems,
de
I would like
contaminación por
to mention
plásticos y
a
microplásticos en la cuenca del río
contamination
Orinoco
example
en
in
Colombia,
the Orinoco
que es una
Basin,
de las
Orinoco
cuencas
River Basin
más
in Colombia,
conservadas
which
y
is one of
prístinas
the
del
most
mundo, y
well-preserved
donde la
river
incidencia del
basins in
hombre
the world,
moderno ha sido
where
nula.
the impact of
Dicho estudio
of
científico que
humanity
se
has
realizó
been null.
encontró
This
partículas de
study found
microplásticos en
microplastic
nuestras
particles
aguas
in our
tomadas
waters,
en diferentes partes de la
and those
cuenca,
samples were taken in in different
demostrándonos que
places of the
aún
basin,
no
and showing us
conocemos los
that
impactos
we
reales de la
still don't know the
contaminación
real impact of pollution,
plástica en el mundo
of
y
plastic
y en
pollution
los
around the world,
ecosistemas.
and on ecosystems.
A partir de eso, entonces, debemos preguntarnos cómo ha llegado el
Therefore, we
plástico
should
ahí.
wonder how plastic
Em,
reached that place,
y cómo han llegado esos microplásticos,
and
cómo es que
how
están
those
siendo
microplastic
transportados
particles
a
are there.
estos
How are they
sitios que
being
son casi
transported to those places
inaccesibles
that are
para el
almost
ser humano.
inaccessible for
Y de ser
humans?
así, estas
And
implicaciones de la
the
contaminación
implications that
plástica
this
son inmensas
plastic
y, por
contamination
supuesto,
could be, because they are huge
desbordan
and
nuestros peores temores. También nuestros
they
territorios y sitios
address the
sagrados son
worst fears. Our
depositarios de grandes
sacred
cantidades de
places are
basura
also
plástica,
depository
nuestros
of
lagos se
plastic waste.
secan y se
Our lakes
contaminan
get
con
dry
plástico.
and
Nuestra
contaminated with
salud, nuestras
plastic.
formas
Our
de vida
health,
y nuestros usos y
our
costumbres,
well-beings, and
gobierno
our customs and
propio,
traditions,
también se afectan.
our
Nuestros
own
pueblos
government,
indígenas están
our indigenous peoples
desapareciendo.
are
Es así como
disappearing because
nuestros
of all
derechos
these
por la
impacts. That's
producción
why
y contaminación plástica son afectados.
that's
Por
why
otro
our rights
lado, con
are being
respecto
affected.
a los sistemas de
Also,
conocimiento,
in connection with
debemos
knowledge
decir
systems, we need
que
to say
hay que tener una claridad
that
con
we need to
respecto
be
a
clear
este concepto,
about
puesto que
this
los
notion,
conocimientos
because
tradicionales
traditional or ancestral
se
knowledge
refieren a los conocimientos
makes
de
reference
otros
to
grupos
the knowledge
de
of other
comunidades
groups,
locales, como pueden
of
ser los
local communities,
campesinos, los
such as farmers
afrodescendientes,
or African
las comunidades
descendants,
Rum u
Rom
otros,
communities, or
pero
others.
nuestros conocimientos
But
deben ser
other
mencionados como
knowledge
sistemas de
has to be
conocimiento
included as a
indígena
knowledge,
que
as an
enmarcan un
indigenous
conocimiento
knowledge system
holístico
that
y
has
que se
a
refiere en
holistic
especial a
knowledge
nuestra ley de
that makes
origen,
reference to our
que
original law,
que se refiere a la palabra de vida y que es la
which needs
palabra con la que
to
se
be,
creó el
or is
mundo,
related
con la
with
que se
the word of
organizó el
life, the word
territorio
with
y dio
which the
orden
territory
a
was
todas las
organized and the
cosas,
world was created to provide order to everything.
cómo deben acomodarse.
So how all these things should be arranged.
Gracias.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lena. I'm very grateful for your perspectives today. We are going to move on to the next section of our discussion, which is around bold solutions. And this segment will be anchored by Alejandra Fada, Tricia Farelli, and Jacob Atapa. So we're going to just try and get to the basics and understand what are bold solutions first. So with that, I'd like to invite Jacob. Jacob is from the Green Africa Youth Organization in Ghana. So Jacob, maybe you could tell us what exactly are fold solutions and why do we need to avoid them in the global plastic treaty conversations?
Thank you very much, Nivan, and hello, everybody. Well, as the name suggests, first of all, fold solutions are the actions or the things that poses as solutions, but in reality, take away attention from what the real problem is and instead transfers the burden to something else. So a very classic example that is on the minds of almost everybody here is incineration. And so further, when the conversation expands, I'll explain more. But essentially, that's what false solutions are. They take away the focus from what the real problem is. They transfer it. And so in the Global Plastics Treaty, the real problem that civil society organizations and other well-meaning actors have been calling for is that we're producing plastics at very unsustainable levels. And that is what the problem is. So any solution that is proposed by anybody that does not address the root of the problem, which is the unsustainable levels of plastic production, can and will be classified as a false solution. The ones that we've seen during INC1, INC2, and even at INC3 that are often referred to by some member states who want to divert attention. Number one is incineration. And incineration is a false solution because it perpetuates what we like to call a linear economy. Because the world is gearing towards a place where we like to be resource efficient. When you look at SDG 12, it talks about responsible consumption and production. And any level of production or consumption that does not fuel circularity in the right sense is a false solution. So incineration is the burning or the combustion of a lot of materials, often with the aim of eradicating the problem. But then the truth is that it brings out more problems. For example, it produces ash, it produces wastewater that is often in many times disposed of in very, very bad manners. And that even creates more problem for the environment as opposed to the real problem, which is the unsustainable levels of plastic production. The second thing is waste to energy plants that a lot of people preach about. The idea is that you can put a lot of materials into one plant and then some way magically turn it into energy. The problem with that particular situation or instance is that you often require even more energy to fuel that process than the energy that you even get out of it. And so you are having a loss of energy in the end, or a net loss of energy in the end. And it's also particularly problematic because it still fuels the use and dispose narrative that we're trying to combat, because we need to all move to a point where we embrace circularity. And when I speak of circularity, I mean the circulation of products and not material. And so we don't want people to circulate toxic plastics. We don't want people to circulate toxic polymers or polymers of concern. What you want them to do is circulate things that agree with the environment and do not pose any threats whatsoever. So by and large, in the plastics treaty, these are the false solutions, and we need to avoid them because it takes away the focus from the problem, which is the levels at which the globe is producing plastics. And if you do not take care, would keep producing more plastics and keep thinking that the problem is waste management, but that is not the problem. The problem is we are producing too many plastics, and we are even recycling only about 10%, according to UNEP. And so you know that circularity or circular economy with specific respect to recycling is not the solution. Waste management is not the solution. We need to tackle the problem from the source, which is the drastic cuts in plastic production globally. Thank you very much, Niven.
Thank you, Jacob. Really appreciate those insights. And just to reiterate, false solutions are not solving the problem. And the only way to do it is a cut in production. But we're going to talk a little bit more about other false solutions. And I'd like to go next to Alejandra. So Alejandra Parra is from the GAIA Latin America and Caribbean team. So Ale, we've been hearing a lot about plastic credits as the INC conversations have progressed. Why are plastic credits a false solution?
Thank you, Niven. Voy a hablar en llano.
I'm going to speak in Spanish.
Los créditos de plástico son
Plastic
también una
credits
falsa solución
are
porque,
also a false solution
como dijo acá
because,
el compañero, no
as our
abordan la
colleague
raíz del
said,
problema
they
y
do not
intentan
address the root of the problem,
aparentar
and
una
they
solución
appear
que
to
en
be
verdad no está.
a solution
Y es
that is
un
not
sistema que se
actually
está proponiendo, de
such,
hecho, como
and
un
it is a
método
system that is being
de control de
proposed
la contaminación
as
por
a method
plásticos
to control
en
plastic
este proceso
pollution
del Tratado Global ha
in the
sido
process of the global
propuesto
treaty.
por el sector
It
privado
was proposed by the private
fundamentalmente.
sector, specifically.
Afortunadamente no hemos escuchado de gobiernos que
Fortunately,
lo estén
we have not
proponiendo
heard any
también.
government
Esperamos
propose it,
que no suceda.
and we
Y
hope
es
this won't happen.
una fórmula que imita el sistema de
This
bonos de
formula
carbón.
mimics the carbon bond system, which has been established for many years now. And it was originated in the original conventions on climate change. Ultimately, this means that when somebody pollutes too much, pays somebody who pollutes little so that they will continue polluting little. And that way, this person gives them bonds which allow the big polluter to continue polluting the environment in big amounts. It's as if a smoker paid a non-smoker so that they will continue not smoking so that this person can continue smoking. That would be the formula of the carbon credits. Carbon credits, so far, we know very well that have not made any contribution at all to reducing the greenhouse gases. On the contrary, these emissions have increased. Plastic credits are a similar system. Big corporations offer money to communities, workers, and even waste pickers, so that they will pick up plastic waste from seasides, from natural environments, and depending on the amount of plastic waste collected, these people can, the plastic producers can access loans to continue producing the same amount of plastics that they currently produce or even more. Because actually, since this market is unregulated, this means that its regulatory frameworks are totally blurry, and we don't know whether these credits will make big polluters and plastic producers to continue producing the same amount, or will even allow them to increase their production as compared to the current levels. So this is clearly a false solution. It is deceitful. It is a mirage that might seem attractive from a distance, but when you take a close look at it, you realize that it is a deceit, and it consists of abusing workers and communities, which ultimately will serve the purposes of big companies in exchange for the delivery of economic resources. And this is used by the big plastic companies to abuse the disadvantaged sectors of society, providing them with these resources, and with this they will continue being the big polluters of the world. So this system has to be flatly rejected, and it has been rejected whenever a solution is offered to the plastics problem.
Thank you, Ale. Thank you for sharing those perspectives with us. Joining us now is Tricia Bareilly of the Scientists Coalition. So, Tricia, can you tell us a little bit about bioplastics and why they are a full solution?
Thanks, Kia ora koutou. Obviously, apparently talk a wigwa. I'm from a colonial settler descent from Aotearoa, New Zealand, so I'm speaking today on behalf of the Scientists Coalition, but at times I'll probably slip into my role in the Pacific and the research I have done there in my Aotearoa. So bioplastics, why are they a whole solution? Again, exactly as we've heard from our speakers, they do detract attention away from aggregate global plastic reduction is exactly what we're all trying to head towards in these treaty negotiations. And so when we start talking more and more about bioplastics production, we start talking less and less about global plastics production. Bioplastics are also a very complicated term. There are so many different definitions around these, and unfortunately, they're quite often touted as better plastics. That is not necessarily true. And so we have the broader category of bioplastics, but then underneath that umbrella term, we have bio-based plastics, which could include fossil fuel-based feedstocks combined with biomass feedstocks. And then we also have biodegradables, and the component of those are compostables. And there are questions about whether or not those compostables are indeed compostables. That some of those are quite difficult to compost, and there are often very few plants available in municipalities to truly biodegrade, compost those plastics. And then we wonder what's left in those residuals. I had residuals talked about before, because new research has shown that there are, in fact, more additives in bioplastics than fossil fuel-based plastics. And so then if they do, in fact, biodegrade into our compost and therefore into our food systems, there are questions about food sovereignty and food safety. There's also questions too about where that biomass comes from. And we don't want to be displacing people, and we don't want to be displacing our food sources, particularly if it's the production of bioplastic for single-use plastics, and certainly not non-essential plastics. So the Scientist Coalition are really interested in the term essential, which use is considered as necessary for health and safety or other highly important purposes, and for which alternatives are not yet established. So we recognise also just transition, and we recognise there are transitional phases. Some bioplastics may be a transitional phase as we move away from those to perhaps zero waste, zero plastic-free packaging systems and so on. But they certainly may not be the end game. Again, it detracts attention and investment away from global plastic production reduction. I'd also just want to talk about sort of the full life cycle of those plastics, and the need for very, very careful assessment, standards, transparency, labeling, so that we actually know what these things are, how we can safely use them, and how they can be truly safely and sustainably dealt with, to ensure that they are in fact circular. And if we think about circular as actually regenerative and restorative, I think you heard that mentioned earlier too, that we need to ensure that they are, and it's replenishing and nourishing Mother Earth rather than contaminating with microplastics and chemicals. So I guess my final note here really is that there needs to be more standards around this. They need to be very rigorously tested, and we're recommending from the Scientist Coalition they be tested for safety, which was human health, but also all health, for sustainability, in this broader sense, for equity and justice as well, and economics and so forth, and for transparency, so safety, sustainability, essentiality, and transparency. Thank you. Kia ora.
Thank you, Tricia. Thank you, Tricia, for sharing those insights with us, and thank you to all of our panelists talking about fall solutions. So thank you, Tricia, Jacob, Ali, really appreciate that. We have one last section that we're going to go through, and it is around human rights. And with us today, we have Olivia Tamon from the Foundation for Environment and Development in Cameroon. So, Olivia, how can global plastic production reduction protect human health, human rights, and the environment?
Thank you very much for that great question. All of us agree here from the former speakers that when we want to talk about plastic pollution, it is extremely important for us to address the aspects of human rights. The former speakers have talked a lot about addressing plastic pollution from the root causes, which I agree entirely that we have to look at the root causes of plastic pollution, from production to extraction, to production, to importation and distribution in our respective countries. We know very well the impacts of plastic pollution on the fundamental human rights of citizens. We know that it impacts considerably on the human rights of vulnerable persons, especially women, children, waste speakers, indigenous people. We know that very well. And so it is extremely important for us to talking about plastic pollution to address human rights principles, especially in the treaty that we are negotiating here in Nairobi. So when we talk about human rights, we talk about the procedural rights. We also think about substantive rights, procedural rights such as access to information, to participation, access to justice. We think about fundamental human rights, the rights to life, it is greatly impacted. We've had cases as a legal practitioner, we've had to address cases of plastic pollution that has led to deaths. We also know about the right to health, the right to a safe, clean, and sustainable environment, which is very important. Protecting the environment and the aquatic life, animal life is extremely important. We also know that the right to safe drinking water. We've had a lot of cases where plastic pollution has actually polluted our rivers, our streams in our communities across the global south. It is seen everywhere. Plastic pollution everywhere. So these rights are extremely important and fundamental to this discussion. I also think that it's very important talking about the plastic treaty, where we have states as duty bearers. Is extremely important for us also to address the accountability of corporations as far as plastic pollution is concerned. States being duty bearers, what does this mean? It means that they have to take into consideration, for example, the United Nations Basic Principles on Human Rights that touch on the accountability for corporations. They also have to think about due diligence, which is extremely important, because at the end of the day, when human rights are affected, they have to start looking at states that have ratified treaties and also the corporations. And so if states do not take into account these principles, it will become extremely difficult for the corporations to be held to account. So human rights is extremely very vital and important in this discussion for us to address it. We've had so many cases in the organization where I work in that we've been addressing with regards to plastic pollution, holding corporations such as Milk to account for their environmental footprints. We've also had for brewing companies that produce soft drinks and water, and they use plastic products to do this. We see it everywhere in our communities. So I think it's extremely important for us to address these human rights issues. Thank you very much.
Amazing. Thank you, Olivia. And I'm sure you can all agree, wow, what an amazing group that we've got here. So what an amazing panel. Can we give them one more round of applause? Okay, so at this stage, we'd like to open up for some Q&A. So I know we have folks on Zoom. Hi again, we still know you're there. And we have folks in the audience. So yeah, we'd like to open up the Q&A. We have colleagues in the room who are on Zoom and can help facilitate the conversation with the Zoom participants as well. So just because you guys are visible, you have preference. Anyone, any questions from the audience here? Too much of information at once. Anything on Zoom? Any questions on Zoom? Yes, we have a question in the audience. Thank you. Yeah, I think so.
So thank you very much. It was really impressive to listen to all of you. A fantastic organization of the panel, by the way. I'm very grateful that you've been talking about all these false solutions. But then if we can focus now on the solutions, which ones are they? We've been talking, of course, about the reduction of the plastics. How can we do that in a way that respects the human rights and fair, just transition?
Thank you. Right, fantastic question to start off with. Any takers from the panel? Jacob, thank you.
Thank you very much for the question. And I think the first thing we need to look at, like we've already said, is global emission cuts. Then that presents the question, if we stop producing as much plastics, what is going to replace that? The simple solution is to prioritize reuse and refill systems. The reason why this is important is because it enables the circularity I spoke about, the circularity of products, not materials. And so that way you have products that are sustainable, that are environmentally friendly within a circular loop. Let's just take it. Thank you. Within a circular loop. And that way you do not hurt the environment, you do not hurt human health. Because the research shows that there's a lot of toxic materials, toxic chemicals that are in plastics. So if we take out the plastics entirely, that means that the replacement has to be something that is sustainable. And that then gives us the opportunity to rethink systems and redesign products. And that is a simple solution. While we're cutting down on global plastic production, we're also prioritizing reuse and refill systems to fill the gap that the cuts in global plastic production presents us with. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you, Jacob. Maybe while we wait for any other questions on Zoom, any other of our panelists has any? Maddie, over to you.
I'd like to echo on what my brother is saying. We can use a refill and reuse system to minimize or to cut off the plastic that is problematic in the materials that we do. For an example, there are some facial products that are made of plastic, and there are facial products that are made of sand. That means it is possible for us to replace plastic particles with the sand in the products that are for facial products. Another thing is for reuse things in our houses, we can make a simple mistake. If you have a glass bottle that in your bathroom you can use for your toothbrushes to put them neatly and hygienically, it can be part of being reused. There is no need to look for things that will complicate things, but the things that are practically in our hands, we can use them. Thank you very much.
So we've got a few more people on the panel that wants to just add to this first question, and then we'll go to our question on Zoom. So Lina, I'll pass to you.
Sí, a ver, yo creo que lo primero que hay que
I
hacer
think the
es
first thing
cambiar un
that we need
modelo
to
de
do
consumo,
is to change our
porque
consumption
nosotros
model,
no podemos cambiar
because we
un modelo
cannot
extractivista
change an
por otro
extractivist
modelo
model
extractivista.
for another one,
Lo que
another
tenemos que
extractivist
hacer es
model.
cambiar
What we need to
el
do
pensamiento.
is to change our way
Y
of thinking.
siempre lo que vemos es que
And
estamos
what we see
pensando en
is that we're thinking
economías grandes y
about
masificadas.
large,
¿Por qué no volvemos a
massified
lo propio
economies. Why
y a
don't
lo
we go
local,
back
que
to
es
our
como
local
funcionaba
economies?
antes y es como deberíamos
That's how it
de
used to
seguir
work,
funcionando
and that's
si
how
es que
we
queremos
should
que
continue
la
to function
naturaleza
if we
perviva
want
y el medio
nature
ambiente se pueda
to survive
recuperar.
and if we
En
want
ese
the environment to
sentido,
be able
por
to
ejemplo,
recover.
nosotros como pueblos indígenas tenemos
The
muchas
indigenous
opciones
peoples have many options
que involucran a
that
el
involve
uso,
the
la
use
administración de los recursos
and the
naturales
management of
y
natural
que
resources
es estable, ¿no?
and
Y uno pone
that are
ejemplos,
very stable. For
hablando de
example,
tecnología.
when we talk about technology,
Tenemos todavía
we
acueductos en el
still
mundo
have
que
aqueducts around the
funcionan y que
world
fueron
that work,
construidos por
that
pueblos
were
indígenas hace
built by
cientos y
indigenous
cientos de años
populations
y que
hundreds and
están
hundreds of years ago
aún en
that are
funcionamiento
still
con
operational
cero plástico.
with
Porque si
zero
vamos a hablar de
plastics.
acueducto,
Because
se
if we talked
utiliza
about
el
an aqueduct,
plástico.
well, plastic is
Tenemos
being
sistemas
used.
de agricultura
We
que
have
son
agricultural systems
milenarios y
that
que no
date
utilizan
back to thousands of years ago,
ningún medio
and they don't use
de
any
destrucción de la naturaleza.
way
Entonces sí
to
tenemos
destroy
mucho como
nature.
nosotros que
So
aportar, pero
we
hay
have
que
much
volver
to
a
contribute,
lo
but we need to
propio y
go
a lo
back
local.
to what is
Gracias.
ours and to what is local. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a few questions coming in, but Ale, maybe I can just for a minute and then we'll go on to Leslie and then onto Zoom.
Sí, muy brevemente y totalmente
Very
de acuerdo
briefly,
con lo que dice
I
Elena
agree
y alineado
with
con eso
what
también.
Elena says, and I
Hay que
am aligned
considerar
with her.
que la
We
crisis
need
de
to
los
consider
plásticos
that the
no es
plastic
una crisis
crisis
aislada
is
de las
not an
otras crisis
isolated
ambientales,
crisis
de
from other environmental
biodiversidad, de la
crises,
crisis climática,
biodiversity,
y
climate
que la verdad es que
crisis.
todas estas
And the
crisis
truth is that
ambientales
all
tienen un
these
origen en
environmental
común y
crises have a
que es
common
este sistema
origin,
económico
and that is
capitalista y
this
globalizado
capitalist, globalized economic
que
system
intenta siempre hacer
that
crecer las
tries
economías
to
permanentemente
grow
como si eso fuera
economies
una fuente de beneficios
permanently
para toda
as if that was
la
a source of
sociedad de
benefits
manera
for
transversal, cosa
society
que
as a
no es
whole
así, es un
in a
sistema
cross-cutting
que
way.
simplemente
But
busca
that's not the
enriquecer
case. The
a unos
system only
pocos que
looks
están por encima y
for
que usan los
the
territorios y
enrichment
las
of
personas que
some
están por
few
debajo.
people
Entonces,
that use
la
the system
solución
to
a esta
impoverish the
crisis
people that are below
de
them.
los
And so the
plásticos tiene
solution
mucho
to
que
the
ver con lo
plastic
que
crisis
decía Elena,
has
tiene
a lot
mucho
to
que
do
ver
with
con
what Elena
soluciones
said.
del
It has
estilo
to do
basura cero, donde
with
el sistema de
solutions
producción y
such as
consumo
zero
tiene
waste,
que dejar de
where
ser
consumption and
lineal,
production
¿cierto?
systems
Porque no vivimos
need
en
to
un planeta
stop being
infinito,
linear because we're
el
not
planeta tiene
in a
capacidad limitada para absorber la
infinite
contaminación y para
planet. We have a
reproducir
limited
los
capacity
bienes
to absorb
naturales
contamination
comunes
and to reproduce natural
renovables se
and
están
renewable
extrayendo a
sources
tasas
and natural
que el planeta
resources
no puede
that are being
volver
extracted
a generar.
at
Entonces hay que
rates
cambiar ese
that the
sistema que
planet
hoy en día
cannot
es
cope
lineal por un
with.
sistema
And so
que
this
sea
is a
cíclico,
current
que
lineal
funcione como
system, and we need a
funciona la naturaleza.
cyclical
La naturaleza
system
funciona en
that
ciclos.
works in
Todo
the
lo que
way
tiene que
nature
ver con los
works.
seres
Nature
vivos
works
funciona en
in
ciclos.
cycles.
Y así
Everything has
también
to do
tiene
with
que
living beings
funcionar nuestro
works in
sistema
cycles.
económico
And that's how our economic
también
system
para resolver las
must work
necesidades
as well.
de las personas
Also
que
to
viven en los
solve the
territorios
needs of the
donde se
people who
extraen los
live on the
bienes naturales
territories where
comunes
natural
y que esos
resources
además
are
sean
being
extraídos
exploited,
para
and
resolver
for
reales
these
necesidades y no
natural
para
resources to be
enriquecer los
extracted
bolsillos
for
de la
real
gente que
needs and
está
not
en
to
los sectores más
fatten up
poderosos de la
the
sociedad.
pockets of those people who are the most powerful in society.
Thank you, Ale. And I'm going to go to Dr. Leslie, and then we have a question by Grove on Zoom before we close out. So, Dr. Leslie.
Thank you so much. Mine is just a very brief one to say that why are we talking about plastics? What's the problem we have with plastics? Is as it relates to environment and health. And that's the point my colleague mentioned there in terms of the toxicity of plastics. This is still why it's this one of the reasons why we're here as under this global treaty to be able to clearly understand and define the chemicals of concerns, the polymer and the problematic, plastics. Once we can come to a very clear understanding of this, then we already have a clear way, a solution. But I think strongly that our reduction effort should now be geared towards the upstream sector. It seems so much attention is towards the downstream, PR and all these other frameworks. But if we can concentrate, for example, talking about the waste trade, if we can concentrate on the upstream sector, where we can actually obtain a reduction in the amount of plastic that is produced, then I think we'll be really be having a solution for it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Leslie. So we running out of time, but we do want to take one more question from Zoom, and this is a question from Grove Harris. So, how far away is the meeting from adopting any of these positions, and is reminding states of their human rights responsibilities effective in reining in corporate interests? So the meeting so far, how's it been going from adopting any of these positions, reminding states of human rights? Okay, Ale?
Yes, maybe we have to explain that the treaty is being negotiated right now. There is a zero draft. This is a document that contains options for goals, options for implementation measures, options for financing mechanisms. And countries now in this meeting will start to decide which option they would like to choose. And actually, the options provide several alternatives, about what the final shape of the treaty could be. Some countries have more progressive points of view. They want to address the full life cycle, and they have suggested having human rights as a key topic to protect, whereas other states do not want to address the full life cycle. They only want to consider waste management. They don't care about citizen participation or human rights at all. So there is a fight between these two positions, and there are also intermediate positions. So I would say that right now, we cannot predict what the treaty will look like in the end, but there is still a possibility to address topics in a specific manner and to address the root of the problem. But to do this, we need everyone's collaboration. We need mobilized and organized citizens, those who defend human rights and the rights of nature and the rights of indigenous peoples, so that our voice can be more powerful than the voice of the industry and the private sector, which puts pressure on these countries to create exactly the opposite conditions as compared to those that we need to address the root of the problem.
Okay, thank you, Ale. We have further contributions, so I'll pass it on to Saleh and then to Larissa.
Con respecto a la pregunta que se hizo
With
recién,
regard to the question
creo que la única
that
forma
was
de
just
llegar a
made,
algo
I think that the
concreto
only way
primero que
to reach a
nada,
concrete result
asumir que
is
este no es solamente un
first
tema de la industria o las
realize that this
petroquímicas,
is not just an
sino
issue
que
of the
también es un tema
industry
de
or
nosotros
the
como
petrochemical
seres humanos,
industries. It is
porque yo hago
also
solamente una
a
pregunta
matter
para
that
que
we as human
entendamos
beings have
qué
to
tan
deal with.
responsables somos todos de todo lo que está pasando.
My question is, how responsible are we about everything that's going on? How many shoes do we have? How many trousers? How many sweaters? How many of us are changing their cell phone all the time? How many of us buy disposable bottles with drinks? How many of us go to the market and use lots of plastic bags? This has to do with the global view, not only considering this treaty, but how we take responsibility for this paradigm shift, how we raise awareness in our way of behaving and in our way of consuming. I think that in our suitcases, we have brought like 7 items of clothing for each day. The throwaway culture is part of the problem. It's not just a matter of blaming those people who have made this contamination so terrible. We have not taken responsibility before, so how do we take responsibility to create this paradigm shift? So how do we make this treaty to be complied with? It is not just civil society that has to be active, all of society has to be active. And this is not happening in any popular territory. This is not happening in Nairobi. This is happening here in the UNEP. This has to apply to the territories. This has to happen at the grassroots. This has to be told to ordinary people, because these issues are discussed at the level of an elite. It is only intellectuals, rulers, the powerful businessmen. But what happens with the territories, which have no idea that a treaty on plastics is being discussed today here? What happens with those territories who don't know that we are dying because of plastics? When this is translated to the territories, changes will happen, and our delegates and our diplomats will feel the pressure of our society. But in the meantime, we must not believe that we are the light in other people's voices, because then this won't happen. And with regard to just transition, precisely for this to be a binding instrument, we must not forget about any stakeholder. We must understand that the paradigm shift in plastics will not happen overnight. A treaty will be written, it will be signed, yes, but many years will go by before plastics go out of the territories, before they exit trade, before they stop contaminating the places where they are buried today. And this is something that has to be considered by the environmentalist, active civil society. Consequences are already happening. There are victims. We have been displaced from our territories because of the micro dump sites, because of the landfills, because landfills are not in the wealthy districts, they are in the populations where we live. So let's be careful with the way positions are determined. Positions have to be humanitarian, they have to be human rights-based, and they have to take into account all the stakeholders who will be harmed by these processes. It's not just the earth or the living beings that are the problem. There are also many people who are victims of this, our indigenous peoples, but also waste speakers, because we have been the only ones who have been at the forefront, picking up material who nobody wanted to pick up. We place value on something that nobody wanted to value, and today we feel threatened, not because we will run out of plastic, but because we are being left out of a transition process where we believe that the instrument has to be binding and mandatory. And you have to defend our rights, because we are already doing it. Now it's your turn. You have to carry out the intellectual task and draft the necessary documents, carry out research with us, realize that in plastic contamination is killing people because of cancer and pulmonary fibrosis. They are suffering from very serious lung problems. So I think that the speeches have to be aligned with the reality that we are living. This isn't going to change tomorrow. We have written thousands of treaties. There have been 28 conferences of the parties. And so what? Who is controlling that this is complied with? Will we continue to do this, or do we take responsibility for what's happening? Thank you.
Gracias. Coincido con las compañeras totalmente. Y bueno, el mandato que originó este tratado fue muy ambicioso en cuanto al tiempo. Realmente tenemos que tener ya un texto final a finales del 2024, ya, para que el 2025 se lleve a cabo una asamblea plenipotenciaria,
so that in 2025 a plenipotentiary assembly can be carried out, and so that this can be signed. We have very little time to carry out our advocacy, so we invite each and every person so that they will become involved in their own countries, so that they review the positions being manifested by their countries today, and so that they get involved in the process of the construction process in their country. The Escazú Agreement says that we have the right to participate in international processes when they relate to environmental care and health care. So we must look for those delegates who are responsible for our country's foreign and health policies. And we must tell them that we are interested in getting engaged, so that the positions of our countries will protect human rights and human health, and the health of ecosystems. Thank you.
Sí, miren,
Yes, look,
creo que lo
I think
que es más
that
importante en
what
cualquier
matters the most
tratado
in
es el
any
respeto a
treaty
los derechos humanos,
is
que es el
respect for
respeto
human rights,
a la vida
which
misma.
is respect to life
Nosotros como
itself.
pueblos indígenas, por ejemplo,
As
estamos
indigenous peoples,
en la
we, for
primera línea
example, are at the
de
forefront
toda esta
of
problemática porque
all
estamos
this
desde el
problem,
momento en que se
because
extraen los recursos naturales
we are
en nuestros
there when
territorios
the natural
hasta el
resources are
punto
extracted
final
from
que
our
son
territories
todos
up to the
los
final point,
botaderos y recibimos
that is
todos los
all the
residuos
dump sites,
en
and we
nuestros
get all the
territorios, en
waste
nuestros
in our
ríos, en nuestros
territories,
aires.
in our rivers, in our
Entonces,
air.
no hay que
So
hablar solamente de
we
derechos
must not
humanos, estamos
discuss
haciendo un
only human
trabajo
rights. We are
profundamente fuerte para que
doing a
también sean
very
incluidos los
strong
derechos de
work
los
in
pueblos
order to
indígenas.
have the rights of
Porque
indigenous peoples included,
esto incluye
because
también el
this
respeto a
also
nuestros sitios
involves
sagrados,
respect
a
for our
nuestra
sacred
espiritualidad,
sites,
a
our
nuestros abuelos y
spirituality,
nuestras abuelas
our
y
grandfathers
a
and
nuestros
grandmothers,
conocimientos.
and
Entonces, si
to our
no están
knowledge.
incluidos
So,
los derechos
if
de los pueblos
the
indígenas
rights of indigenous
como
peoples are not included,
con esa especificidad yo creo que no
with their
vamos a poder
specificity,
hablar de que
I
hay
think that
una
we won't be
transición
able
justa, porque una
to talk
transición
about just
justa tiene que
transition,
incluirnos
because
a
just
nosotros que
transitions
ya tenemos unos
must
derechos
include
adquiridos
us, because we
históricamente.
have
Gracias.
already inalienable rights historically. Thank you.
Sorry, everyone. There's a lot more conversation talking about, but maybe we can continue in the room, just one-on-one. But thank you, everyone, for joining us. Thank you to our online audience for staying with us, and all of everyone here that's joined us. Thank you so much. Thank you to our interpreters online for being with us. Hopefully, you will walk away from this event with some new insights. And again, to highlight our message is that we did not start the plastic crisis, but together we can end it. Thank you so much for joining us. Goodbye.